Hello, hello. Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to the UpSet podcast. I am one of your hosts, and I never come alone. I would never dare do that. So I have the crew with me. What's up, everybody?
Hey.
Hello.
Hello,
Happy
family.
Sunday.
Happy holidays.
Yes.
Happy belated Thanksgiving.
Yes. Happy
Oh, really?
belated
That
Thanksgiving.
title, huh?
I know. And just so you guys know, we are live tonight. And
We're
so we're looking
live.
forward to your commentary and putting up some of your comments on this subject. As you guys know, we were supposed to talk about this last week, but we just couldn't resist what was happening around us. And so we've entitled this Thanksgiving or ThanksTaking. What do you guys think about that title?
Well,
All
Well,
right.
you
I wonder
know,
what
Hope
that
we have
means.
an expert on the line.
I know for Black Friday, I went into a department store and stood in there and said, I discovered you and I took everything and didn't pay for it.
And he still managed to be
What
here
an
tonight.
analogy. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we didn't have to
Yeah.
go to the jailhouse and we were able to show up tonight. So everything is good.
Exactly.
yeah,
And
tally.
and it is interesting having this conversation after we've all enjoyed our wonderful Thanksgiving meals. And that's not to say there's not a place for that, but we really want to take some time to really dig into this history of Thanksgiving because, we get caught up, guys. We have to admit, we get caught up in what's presented before us. We get caught up in what we're taught in school. We get caught up in what we see in the media. And sometimes we don't take the time to really delve into why are we doing this? How did this get started? What does this mean? So we're really excited about talking about this. And GP, you're going to lead us out. We do have a resident expert. We hate to be we hate to be one of those, those of us who may have attended predominantly white schools and you were always a black kid that had to talk about Black History Month. We hate to do that, but we may have to do a little bit of that tonight. But anyway, GP, the floor is yours.
Yeah, honored to introduce this topic, and then I'll hand it over to our resident expert, Chuck. Most people, first of all, shout out to Laverne and Don't You Know in the comments, and Patrick. Shout out to you all engaging. When people think of Thanksgiving, they think of a group of people who fled religious persecution and they discovered a territory and they shared a meal with the Indians, and it was a wonderful and joyous occasion, and they cut the turkey and then the end. And so we continue the tradition today. But the reality is there's a deeper, darker history that is not often told. And so the question is, who is telling the story? Who is telling the narrative? Because whoever tells the story has power, and because they can frame the narrative. And so, Chuck, can you frame the narrative the right way?
Well, this all started back in the 1600s in the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts. That's where it all began for Thanksgiving. And depending on who you talk to, some people say that the myth is that the Pilgrims and the Indians united 400 years ago for the first Thanksgiving. That is not so. Not as cleanly as that's stated. There was some unity, but the peace didn't last long. The settlers and their one-time allies were at war a generation later. So some people, especially the indigenous people of this country, sees this as not Thanksgiving, but as a reminder or a day of mourning for the loss of the indigenous people in the United States or in the Americas, which includes Canada. So, yeah, that's where the myth started. There was some truth to the story in that the indigenous people at that time helped the colonizers, the Dutch who came here, to till the land, to grow, to do the farming, because, of course, the indigenous people of this continent were very good at that, and the Dutch weren't. So they showed them how, and they celebrated their first harvest, and that's where Thanksgiving started. They together celebrated their first harvest from the instruction of the indigenous people of how to farm the land.
Wait, so they helped them and then they
Yes.
turned around and hurt them?
Absolutely.
How trifling is that?
No, man, that's really messed. So let me ask you. You said something that made me say, you know how people have different triggers, like they hear certain words, and
Mhm.
is it insensitive for us during Thanksgiving time to be like Happy Thanksgiving? Like for them, it's a reminder, it's a
Right.
warning, and yet we're
Mm.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Right.
everybody, happy thing, assuming that it's happy for everyone. Is that insensitive?
Well, I guess it depends on the circle you're in and the people you're talking
Mhm.
to. I don't see any harm in being thankful. And we can use Thanksgiving as a time to be thankful for many things. But I think, to be honest with you, we need to recognize the myth and to dig deeper into the story behind what the pilgrims did versus what the indigenous people did. And to be honest with you, it really is more of a mourning than a Thanksgiving. I think the Thanksgiving part is nice, music behind you. They're celebrating the first harvest,
Mhm.
violin music, orchestra, all that's nice. But what the writers of our history and our history books at that time didn't tell you the rest of the story.
Hmm.
And it's the rest of the story that I think we need to recognize and acknowledge for the indigenous people of this.
Well, I was just gonna see is, I'm thinking back on growing up and being kindergarten, and I have to say kindergarten to sixth grade, where I went into Adventist schools, but I was in public school in that time. We had to make feathers.
Mhm.
You had to learn how to cut them out, the feathers out, and you learn to make the band and the stapler.
That's right.
You color them fall colors and all of that.
Mhm. I remember.
I'm back now at that there where you kill a turkey and everything was about cranberry and we had a day off from school. So to me, before I got hip to it and still learning about it, because I have to be honest with you, I'm saying, wow, okay, I'm only think about what happened to slavery as far as we're concerned, and then now you turn around
Right.
and find out that there's a
Mm.
whole different ball game that's going on and how it's been going on. I think it's time for us to start looking at the perspective and the sensitivity of how we treat people and the things that we say. I know that we had our discussions, and I know we're going to get to it, but I still look at the baseball teams. I still look at
Mhm.
the
The
football,
Redskins.
the
Call them
Redskins.
out. Call them out.
Yeah,
Well,
and-
you don't have Redskins anymore. They
right.
just
They
Right.
changed.
they're the Washington football team.
They
Yeah.
call it Washington.
Until recently, though, yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
I mean, and these are
That was
things
like
that-
yesterday.
Mhm.
and these are things we've been fighting. They've been fighting over for so long that they just even stopped because they don't even have the backing
Decades.
of
Right.
people to social justice for them
Mhm.
So there's no one standing for them. While we still talk about Black Lives Matter, where's the push on their end to say the fairness of it? So the reason why I'm saying that is because I can remember growing up in all of this. When I went to Adventist schools, it was totally different. They ain't talk about Thanksgiving at all.
Right.
Well, I know. Well, we did it here in Philly at Larchwood, running
Mhm.
around with them great big old buckles on top of these stovepipe hats and all. But
Yep.
but let me do something that is so unlike me, which is to ask an unpopular question that forces us to look at things from a different perspective.
Say
One of the more widely accepted approaches to dealing with the way people act um, is to use what's called trauma informed therapy, which asks the question not why did you do it, but what happened to you, what led you to this place. And so when we speak about these people who came, and incidentally they were Puritans, the name Pilgrim became popular later, but
Right.
why did they do it? Why did they do what they did ultimately? I mean, did they come here saying, did they get on the boat and get tickets that said, now you're going to the new world and you're going to find some darker people there with feathers on and you should kill them? Or, I mean, what was it that led them to act the way they did?
Perhaps they
Well,
demonized the difference of the Indians. They
Mhm.
ostracized what they did not understand. What still goes on today. I mean, their prejudice, their biases. They had a preconceived notion, and so The violence was just a reflection of what they had on the inside.
Right.
GP said because they were wicked.
But they
Wicked
also,
is
when
what
you,
they were.
Nick, also when you think about it, we also think about how people treat each other when they don't dress the way we dress, or the language is not the same. The power of the land that they lived on. You know, we always talk about what came over on the Nina or the Pinto or the whatever you want to call those.
Santa Maria.
But but the thing is that they were already here doing their thing.
Say that.
So when you're looking at their age, they weren't aged out at 70 and 80 years old. They were aging out at 100 and 115, 120.
Right.
Where did that come from? You know what I mean? The skin, the clothes they wore came from the actually what kept them warm was buffalo skin or whatever skin that they killed and ate. And I'm not going to say they worshipped it, but they revered nature more than we do. Or
it was a great
did.
respect. Absolutely.
Yeah, great
and
respect.
it's still that way now, because they are still fighting for the lands. You've heard about the oil pipes, the oil lines that they're trying to put in. But, you know, this year is the 400th year of Thanksgiving.
Wow.
400 years of us celebrating. It started in 1621.
Wow.
And so we've been touting that myth for so long. I mean, you know, until I started having a personal interest in the indigenous people, I thought the same thing. I was, you know, like everyone else. But when you deep dive and you find, you know, the real story, the true account of what was happening, it really starts about. And I'll tell you, even preparing for the show, I mean, I found myself getting a little depressed when I looked at all of the details of what these people suffered. But, you know, to answer your question, address your question, Nick, I think that basically they were greedy and they wanted the land. They just wanted the land. I mean, this is the new world.
Yeah.
And they wanted to claim it as theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they could do that was, well, number of things. Of course, they slaughtered many thousands of indigenous people, but they tried to assimilate them. You know, okay, so, you know, we can't kill you all, so we're going to make you like us.
Right.
Mm.
So they started these schools, these Indian boarding schools or residential schools with, you know, they're called different things. And they thought that if we can get them when they're young, put them in these schools and teach them the European way, our assimilation process will be easier. Now, the adults wouldn't stand for it. In fact, there wasn't a whole lot they could do with the adults except put them on reservations.
Mm-hmm.
But they literally went to their homes and separated the children from the parents and drug them off to these schools. Doesn't that sound familiar? About
Very
separation?
familiar. Very familiar.
Yeah. So they separated them and brought them to these schools. And you know what? The parents were fined or beaten if they tried to resist having their children taken to these schools. And as soon as they arrived at the schools, they immediately cut their hair, stripped them of their tribal clothing. Everybody had the same haircut, and they were forbidden to speak their tribal language. They were taught immediately English. But, you know, that was a master plan. First of all, that's terrible enough. I said, oh, my gosh, that's terrible enough. But there was a master plan. Their plan was to assimilate all indigenous people as they took over, quote unquote, the new world.
That's powerful. So I want to reframe what Pat said. They had purpose, they had property, they had pride, which led them to being persecuted by the enemy.
Was he preaching? No.
I think he is.
So.
Yeah.
So
He went into that alliterative run there.
this is a narrative that is familiar to us as a people. And so as Black people, we resonate with that struggle. But my question to Chuck is, I've heard of Indian reservations. Isn't that them repenting of their sins, giving them land back for them to live on and do what they want to do? Have we repented from our sins?
No,
Certainly
no,
can't be
not at all.
repentance.
There are still reservations, and there are still trials going on in court now.
Yeah.
Of them trying to get their land back, because the United States broke a lot of treaties. So did Canada. They broke a lot of treaties with the indigenous people. And so I find it ironic that you would give back something that wasn't yours in the
I
first
was
place.
just about to say that, man.
I mean, the mindset of
Just
that.
about to
I mean,
say it.
you see parallels now. Look at what happened with the Africans that were brought here. I mean, you know, African Americans own land and have land, and some of them are struggling to get it back. I mean, it's the same scenario here. You know,
And there's one
the
common
adversary
denominator.
just got into these people and said, "We are taking over everything." And what's ironic is that some of them thought, according to historians, some of them thought they were bringing civilization to the continent, when these tribal groups already had their systems of trade and systems of government, and here they're coming to say, "Oh, we're going to bring you civilization."
You know,
I mean, it's
guys, you know, I think also about there's over 500, and maybe I'm wrong, Chuck, you can help me with this. The last number I saw was something like over 500 different tribes. And just to think, the different tribes were communicating with other tribes.
That's right.
With different languages, etc., which means that there was a system even before they came. GP, I got a little problem when you say "our" because I ain't a part of them, but it's okay though. We'll work it out. And when I see that, you know, what they traded in the beginning, I'm sure. You know, what bothers me is that you can go back to Africa, and they did the same thing there, gave them something, thinking with us thinking it was something else that was supposed to get. So you understand what I'm saying? So and got tricked into slavery, where we now say we gave ourselves up in slavery. You know how that story goes. But they're doing the same thing with Native Americans, doing exactly the same thing. They offer them how to shoot a gun. They offer them, you ready for the big one? That's still hurting 400 years later, alcohol.
Oh, absolutely. And diabetes is major in their reservations.
When you look at that, and when you look at the generations that goes that follows of alcoholism on the reservations, the abuse to each other on the reservations, sort of allowing them to police themselves with nothing to police themselves with on the reservations. You know what I mean?
Well, you know that it's interesting you bring that up about policing themselves. The colonizers, I'll just refer to them. You know who I'm talking about. The colonizers had the audacity to say, you can have your own law enforcement. You can have your own courts. And even today, there is Indian court, and then there is the regular court. But here's an interesting caveat about that. If an indigenous woman is raped on indigenous land, the United States government predetermines what that person's trial or jail time would be.
Sentencing.
So, yeah, the sentencing. So there have been many stories and testimonies where, and by the way, as a side note, many indigenous women are being lost by the hundreds every day.
Wow.
Just look it up. And there are no headline news about that.
Right.
But going back to my original statement about law enforcement, and right now, if you were to go on to some of the Indian reservations, you would find very modern law enforcement. They have, uniforms, they have, squad cars and all of that. But when it gets to their court, it's a different story. I heard one story, I read about one story. A woman said that her daughter was raped, and not raped on the reservation. She was taken off the reservation and raped. She was taken back to her indigenous territory. She reported it. The Indian police could not arrest the person because the act didn't take place on the reservation.
Yeah.
And their sentencing is different. One testimony was that a woman was sexually abused. It was reported, and the individual, I think, spent a week in jail because that was the sentencing guidelines for people who, did the abuse. And it didn't matter if they were Indian or white. If it was on the reservation, there's one set of rules. Off the reservation, a different set of rules. And, on the Indian reservations, they have their own police officers, professionally trained. I mean, they're not riding around on stallions with guns and heroin. I mean, they have some of the very latest law enforcement, equipment. However, when it gets to the court, it's a different story. So there are two forms of justice. We ever heard that before?
That sounds familiar too.
Yeah.
Well, I asked a question a little while ago to which there were several responses, and I even saw some in the chat that we talked about the evil, rapacious, avaricious approaches of the Europeans who came over. And it made, isn't it wonderful to be able to separate yourself from villainous people? They were so horrible and wicked and evil. So glad that we're not like that. Isn't that
true? Yeah, Pat. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just them, not us.
Yeah,
right?
And one of the things, but the fact of the matter is, and I shared this in the green room with you, that the people who came to this country, first of all, they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know that there was a world to conquer. They just wanted to get away from where they were. But the idea of conquering the land and subsuming the land came from people who were Bible believing people who read passages of scripture like this one, and I share it now because they were Bible believing people, like many of us in on this forum, like many of us, and then and then there's Pat, and so touche. But this is Deuteronomy chapter 20. It says, when you come into the land which I am going to give you, you shall devote the people to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites, Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, you shall utterly destroy them. And then another place God says, I will send pestilence and disease before you. When the Puritans landed, the Wampanoags had been pretty much devastated by disease, which had weakened their number. And many of these Bible-believing people assumed that God was wiping out the heathen on their behalf. And they did this thing based on their religious belief that God would bless them at the expense of somebody else. Now, that don't sound too different from a lot of us, does it?
Yeah, it's dangerous to take a passage and to apply it to your scenario, because if you take a text without the context,
then you con the text. Well, we do it all the time when we talk about us, and then we talk about the heathens, because we consider ourselves Israel and everybody else is just hellbound heathens. So, I mean, what I'm saying basically is that these people, while we make them, we have the corners of their lips dripping with blood, getting on the boat saying, yeah, in moments I shall possess everything. I mean, the truth of the matter is that these were people who allowed their interpretation of the scripture to think that God was working in their behalf and that they were doing what God wanted, which is not that different from where we are.
True.
I don't know about that.
I was hoping
about that.
It's a true statement, but I say
You're trying to
in modern
aggravate
day,
me.
it don't make it right.
Go get him, Marlene.
He's trying to aggravate. I'm trying to learn.
Hitler thought he was doing a wonderful thing for God.
Who's this now?
Hitler.
Yeah. Well, no, but Hitler never quoted text saying, Hitler never got up and said, yeah.
Oh, no, he did that at home.
While he was eating his vegetarian meals. But Marlena, these people, these pilgrims came over and basically stole the land from peace-loving people, correct?
Don't try to ask
Marlena's getting so good these days. She's so good.
Don't try that.
Because the fact of the matter is that indigenous people made war too. The Narragansetts were
absolutely.
Deeply involved in the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incas were as bloodthirsty a people as you could ever imagine. And so, look, the Europeans did enough bad where we don't have to make up stuff,
Right.
But also,
and apotheosize people for the sake of telling a good story.
Also, were they not coming here for religious freedom so that people could live the way that they wanted to live without persecution? And then the very people who were coming to escape persecution started to persecute.
Well,
you give what you've gotten, I mean,
right.
you throw what you caught,
Right. And so then they use scripture to justify their own means. I mean, you talking about annihilating a whole race of people and calling them ignorant because they're different than you.
Yeah.
And so I don't see, I just look at them making an excuse of God, because God never said that these people were unholy. That was their interpretation, because to me, there's always that desire for supremacy. There's always someone beneath me. And so they come, and then the people whose land it was, they try. It's like they did Jedi tricks, making people think that they're no longer intelligent beings. And so you need an intelligent being to show you how to talk, how to live. And these people have been living for thousands of years just fine. Before they got there. And then you're going to tell me I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I don't know how to worship, I don't know how to live, I don't know how to do anything. So then you want to kill me and then give me all your little smoking and alcohol to kill me and my people, So all this holiness that you're talking about, sir, I don't see it.
Oh boy.
No, I don't remember anybody saying anything about holiness.
You said that they were religious people, the Puritans coming over, and they did what they thought God was telling them to do.
I say that you can be religious and do what you think God is telling. Look, right now there are people who will get an airplane, get in it, and they will call out to God before they crash that airplane into a tower. There are religious people who believe that they're doing right. I don't call that holy. Look, there are people who believe that God will take the wealth of people who go to church on one day and give it to people who go to church on another day, because the day that they go to church on is right and the day the other folks go to church on is wrong. They're religious people.
Who you talking about?
I don't know. It's not December the 11th yet.
I like that. I like that. Really to bring this back to where it is. Thanksgiving, why we do it, and you did throw the curveball, Nick. We always look for the curveball, but every now and then we hit it. We'll catch it. Every now and then, and I think that what is stirring me right now is the ability to teach my grandchildren, the ability to teach from the pulpit. The opportunity to be able to say this is what really happened. Because the truth is that when you go back, and Nick, is always good to talk to you on air, off air. Why? Because you always have let us think. There's a lot of stuff in Adventism that we took from the Puritans. It's a whole lot that we took from the Pilgrims in Adventism, Black Adventism also. But I think that we have to be able to recognize that they are people too. And I'm going to admit something to you. I don't really know anyone that, quote unquote, I'm going to call it Indian in my language, until Chuck and maybe one other person that came out and said, this is what I am. So if I had not talked to Chuck in the past 2 months, maybe 3 months over this situation, I would still be in a dark place. I'm not talking about not understanding Thanksgiving, y'all. Come on, I'm not that far beyond. But to understand the things that occur.
For sure.
I mean, even casinos, that's another story. We could talk about that another day. Right. But when you look at even casinos, and I know I talked about the laws, but now how are their children learning about it? It's almost like it's meant to be for them to wipe out
Yeah.
It's a white
Sounds like
I agree.
critical race theory.
Yep.
I'll
Yes.
say that.
That's what it
Exactly.
sounds like.
Yep.
And so when
Exactly.
I go to read, I have to ask Chuck, what is a viable source? Because the sources that I look at has everything didacted out. It's just erasing. I just get crumbs, and that's all I can
Right.
believe. And so even when you do study, but you're studying limited information, and those who really know what happened, deleted it.
You have to really do some cross-referencing. Even in my research, you have to cross-reference different accounts, dates, times, people, just so that you can connect the dots accurately. But one of the things I wanted to bring out was that what happened to the indigenous people, the First Nation people of this continent, there is a parallel between that and what happened to our African descendants when they were brought to this country. There is an amazing parallel. One of them is, the story of Tulsa, okay? How it was burned down. These were wealthy blacks that were, had their own businesses, so forth. You know the story, and we bring that up during Black History Month. But there is a similar story that affected the Osage Nation. They were very wealthy. They were very organized. In fact, one historian said the Osage Nation, the land that they had at that time, in equivalent today, they would have been the richest nation on earth.
Wow.
Not in the United States, on earth.
Wow.
They were literally millionaires because of the resources they were sitting on top of, black gold, Texas tea.
Wow.
Well, the first thing you know.
And and yet the colonizers, I'm just going to use that name, decided they wanted to murder the Osage people, and they did so. I'll highlight a book. Tashish has a book that I got some of this information from. But there is a book called Killers of the Flower Moon. And that was a story of how the Osage Nation was devastated because they were too rich, too powerful, and our brethren didn't like that. And so they did the similar things that would happen to blacks in Tulsa. I just find it amazing when I deep dive into this history, there's so many parallels. It's happening again and again, and there's a version of it happening today.
Come on.
So what does that tell us? I think one of the commenters said, nothing has changed, or has it changed?
Isn't any? So I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I don't hear as much, I don't want to say outrage, or to me, it doesn't get the fervor or the backing like things like Black Lives Matter or even Asian Lives Matter. Why is that? Why do you think it's one of those things that we kind of hear and just kind of nod, but don't really get involved or kind of put any action behind?
Well, I think part of that is our corporate sponsored media. Our corporate sponsored media will flash headlines that will make them money. And since there are many indigenous activists now, they kind of temper how much of these stories they put on, now around Thanksgiving, a lot more issues and topics come up about the indigenous people. But they have been activists since they've been driven to their reservations, and they're still activists. One of their bright hopes, of course, is now that Deb, Haaland she is an indigenous woman, is now the Secretary of the Interior, which all of the Native Americans' business, when it comes to land, falls right into her lane. So they were excited when Joe Biden appointed her to be the Secretary of the Interior. And trust me, they're watching her like a hawk. All of the indigenous nations are watching to see what she can and what she will do with reference to that, because there's still a lot of unsettled, cases. There's still land that is still owed. So, we'll see what happens. But no, there's not going to be a whole lot of press about the indigenous people unless you see them as activists on the Alaskan pipeline or some other pipeline where they're trying to protect the ground. They're trying to protect, as they say, Mother Nature. They don't want oil pipes going through their lands, digging up the graves of their elders to make room for construction of they're still getting treated that way, but you don't see a lot of it in, unless there's some major incident during during activism, they don't get much press.
I want to throw a fastball because your wife is not your wife. This lady is in here. I
Shout out to Carrie.
Yeah, right. I actually looked at Wall Street and why the name Wall Street came about. You're talking about 400 years ago, 1621,
right?
And this actually happened 1624. Chuck, our resident media guy, and Chuck, what happened? I have it in front of me.
Well, the Dutch wanted to, now depending on what historical narrative you read, because I researched this pretty thoroughly. Now, some historical accounts were that the Dutch wanted to put up a wall to separate them from the English and the pirates. Okay.
Right.
All right. So that's interesting because I happen to know the real story. So I dug some more. And then finally came up with a narrative that said that basically the Dutch wanted to separate themselves from the English and the indigenous people.
I see that.
And for the indigenous people. So, and there's a remnant of the wall in New York, I understand. I've not seen it.
Yep, I see.
But I understand there's a remnant of the wall. And what was interesting, if you go further in that story, as Wall Street started to develop as a financial center, that wall also figuratively was also keeping them out or measuring their involvement in financial dealings. This is just evil.
Yeah.
It's just flat out evil for people to sit down and say, we are going to oppress these people on purpose.
And that brings up a comment that Yanni was talking about in the chat. She says she's actually been researching and following the amount of Native American women who disappear monthly and are then found dead.
Wow.
Nothing is done to help them. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. And it's happening more than you know. Some of the schools that now many of them have been disbanded. There are a few of them still going on, but they've changed their their normal operation or the operation they had many years ago. But many of them, because they lack the education and they lack the welfare, have turned to drugs and are on the streets of a lot of urban areas that are near where their reservations are. And they are not only sufferers of sex abuse and rape and that sort of thing, but some of them are perpetrators of it because of their plot in life right now.
Right.
They have no jobs. Diabetes is through the roof with many of these nations. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but
Chuck,
I think
go ahead. Can you share with us your heritage? I think that would be interesting to share your heritage in this.
Well, that's how I got started in this. My grandmother on my mother's side, sat us down and we were talking about, our heritage. And she's of the Cherokee Nation. She and her, I wish I had a picture of the two of them. But if you were to look at them, all they needed was the dress. And you'd say, yep, those are indigenous people. And she said that we were descendants, how much, I don't know. I'm not doing the DNA thing. Okay. I go by what my folks tell me. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've been following the history of the indigenous people. I've gone to powwows. I've actually sat down in teepees and talked to the original people. They're just fascinating people and loving people. My goodness. Mm-hmm. but yeah, it all started with, my grandmother sharing that with me.
And I, now that I think about it, I mean, I knew Chuck's sister, and you could clearly, see, that was there.
Nick, behave, man.
No, she's beautiful. No, Chuck's sister's a beautiful young lady. Beautiful young.
I'm sorry, Chuck. I'm just.
No, let.
I'm finding a way to get back at Nick
I
somehow.
bear witness. I bear witness that her sister's beautiful. But what I have not shared is that my mother's grandfather was a full Seminole. So my mother, I think, was 1/4 or something like that Seminole Indian, which I guess, of course, makes me some. But most black folks, remember, Chuck, when all black folks wanted to be just anything, just don't make me 100% Negro.
Right. Yeah,
trying to get that check, huh?
Yeah, no, we just didn't want, being black was such a curse and a scourge.
Mm-hmm.
And only now are we coming to a place where we recognize that we can be who we are and extol
black and I'm
others
proud.
But Tony Caldwell Hall mentioned about
black.
Mount Rushmore, and I remember talking with a person about that, how that Mount Rushmore was built on land that was sacred Native American land.
That's right.
And the worst part about it is that some of the people who did the sculpting were racist sympathizers with the Klan. I mean, the spirit of oppression, subjugation, and conquest lives on. The reason I raised some of those issues earlier on was to make sure, what people like to do is assign it to other people.
Right.
But it also lives within us.
Yes.
I give you a good example. I mean, as people who all of us feel that Sunday has no validity. Well, there were many Native American people who worshiped the sun.
All right.
So what would we say then?
And Nick, from sunset to sunset, by the way, I was just reading it. They did it the same way. From sunset to sunset is a full day.
Yeah. I mean, and so what happens?
Did they worship the god of the sun, or they just worship the sun?
Both, in many cases. I mean, but the only point that I'm trying to make is that when you allow yourself to believe that people who are different from you do not have the same rights that you have and should not be regarded with the same level of humanity, you crack the door for oppression to walk in boldly. And even though we're talking wonderfully about them, I mean, these are folks, I mean, look, they couldn't be an elder. They wore jewelry. And,
That's right.
And so you'd have to, I'm just simply saying that we need to be careful as to how we assign all of the evil to people who are, quote, not like us, because.
Well, on the heel of that statement, Nick, you're absolutely right, because there were many whites or fair-skinned people, however you want to characterize,
Caucasoids,
Caucasian, were friendly and helpful with the indigenous people. Just like there were many who supported the Underground Railroad and marched in a lot of our marches. There are other people of color who have done that in support, and we know that there's always going to be, a group of people who's going to join with the indigenous or the oppressed to help them. But I just think that we really don't have an idea of the scale of bloodshed. You're talking hundreds of thousands of people, many of them children. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you share, Chuck, kind of what happened to women, indigenous women, when they were taking over their territories?
Oh, they were passed around for sex. Even the military, the cavalry, used some of these women. And of course, some of them were abused in the sight of their own families. Have you seen that before? And they, what can you do when you're overpowered? you know, and they tried to fight back, and they really, you know, we all know the famous story about, oh gosh, there's so many chiefs that have won. Sitting Bull, the, you know, big conflicts, and they won, and they fought, you know, desperately. But yeah, the women, not within their tribal territory or their tribes themselves and their own civilization that they had, but outside. I mean, it's like anything else. They don't consider Indigenous women valuable, even today. I mean, you know, they're missing by the hundreds every day. And you don't, there's no hue and cry about that. There was one case in Canada. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police finally, after, you know, they almost had to put a bill through their legislature to have the police go out and search for this one woman that had been missing for years. This was an Indigenous woman who was kidnapped. I don't know. If we look at how the adversary has us thinking about each other, the inhumanity to man, almost nothing surprises me. You know, even women today in the United States are still thought of in a secondary mindset.
Come on. We can go there.
So, yeah. So, I mean, Indigenous women, oh my, no, they, you know, they're less than the less. So, but yeah,
lower
I mean,
than us, Chuck, lower than black women.
Yep.
I thought we were the lowest.
Mercy.
Oh no. Well, you all in that same area, because they weren't thought of as real people. They weren't valued. They just weren't valued, you know. And it's awful. And I can go even further into the atrocities. There's no need for that. I think everybody gets it, that they were treated poorly, and that Thanksgiving really should be a time of mourning and a time of remembering those who were lost. This was their land, and we need to pay homage to that and tell the truth. When I finally found out what Thanksgiving was all about, I was so angry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really? I remember the textbooks we got in school. You know, Indians were savages. You know, 10th Cavalry over the hill to rescue from the savages. You know,
I'm sorry, Chuck. I'm thinking about that video about 3-4 weeks ago. It came out that a teacher was trying to teach a geometry or was trying to teach a math principle, and put on a native, and was around
really,
yep,
hopping up and down,
and
wow,
you know how it is when you say crazy things, or you somebody recorded it and put it out there, and my understanding is that she was fired.
Right?
Yeah, you figure. Yeah.
Canceled.
So these are the things that happen though when you catch them. Imagine what is being said behind doors.
Yeah, but she probably didn't think she was doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? She thought she was probably embracing the culture in her mind. Not even, and that's I think what we don't get. We don't know how to appreciate certain cultures. We don't know how we're offending certain cultures by the things that we do. And I think, you know, even with the name changes with the sports teams, there's some other things that sometimes we unconsciously say or do. I know we talked about some of them. I mean, I know I asked about, you know, we used to say sitting Indian style. I guess that's not necessarily offensive, but there are a lot of little things that we say.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
In the street, we use one in the street called Indian giver.
Yep.
I was just going to say, we talk about when we catch them and what others have. I mean, we use the term Indian giver. We tell people, man, you off the reservation.
Right.
I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is that we participate in this,
right,
and that the spirit of oppression is not something that we're immune to.
Right.
And then let me add another one, and that is there is still a level of there's a historical tension that exists between Native peoples and Black people that has lasted for quite a while, based upon what happens when racism turns two people against each other, squabbling over the last, cup of bread. I mean, slice of bread. You had Native American tribes that had black people as slaves. Lots of them. Well, this was not an aberration. This happened.
Right.
And then you had the Buffalo Soldiers, who were an absolute terror to certain Native people out west. And I don't think we've ever resolved some of the tension that exists between black people and certain Native people in this country.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories that cover their experience, and there were warring nations. I mean, they were treacherous towards each other, but they were going by their tribal government, their understanding of what a tribe and how a tribe is governed. They had their wars and they had their disagreements, but I just think it's atrocious that a government, so-called government, can come up with an actual law. The Trail of Tears was the result of an enforcement of the Indian Removal Act.
Yeah,
they legislated the removal of indigenous people, and it became a law, so they could do whatever they want. I mean, just like slavery. There are some laws on the books in some of our states that are legacy laws from way back. Silly stuff that was racially motivated, but they made them into laws. And so you couldn't get in trouble if you abused a Native American or an indigenous person if you were acting under the Indian Removal Act. You weren't a bad guy.
Sort of like the Slave Retrieval Act.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
yes, exactly.
Gang, let me tell you what I've decided to do. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, somebody. What I decided to do was to do my own sensitivity training. To be able to sit down at the dinner table, and it doesn't have to be, a sermon or even a sermonette, but just to be able to say, hey, everybody, we're meeting together because we're family. We're meeting together because we're thankful, etc. We ought to be thankful every day. I think that this is just teaching me personally that there's more to learn. When you travel outside of the United States, you recognize how old different places are. Italy, all these different places. The United States is
we're teenagers, we're puppies.
Yeah, why not do a doctorate in United States history? It's only about this small. There's not much to learn from it. But then what I always say to myself is, what happened before 1492? What happened before 1621? What happened before that? There's God's people that were here. They may not they may not have been sitting in the pews. This is what frightens me traditionally. And I'm gonna be straight with you. It frightens me traditionally. They may not have been in the pews. They may not have sung hymns. All right. They may have saw their Jesus in chiefhood or whichever. I believe when we get to the kingdom, God's gonna be like, yo, come over here. You thought you were the only ones that I was looking out for.
Come on.
I always believe that. And, and the story goes a little bit deeper than that. But when you go to Mexico, see, we only talk about the United States. We only talk about a little bit of Canada. When you go to Mexico and they have a drawing of their conversation with a higher being, and you take that picture that they have put up and see some of the original pictures that is put up, including Sister White's vision of who she saw Jesus, they look exactly the same. So I don't want to look at them and say and put my traditions on them and say, they're not saved or they're savages, etc., etc. It's time for sensitivity training from the pulpit to the pews. And it's time for us to reteach our young people, the generation that missed it. And that's what I think. I think I'm pushing towards that as far as Thanksgiving is concerned.
I'm just grateful to be a part of this this broadcast with our youth director's final day is
well, you know what? I want to recommend a few books.
Yes, please.
Folk want to read, and I think Tasha has the graphic for it. There's several. I mentioned this in some of my response: The Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders, and The Birth of the FBI. Then is the Indigenous Rights. Then the next, this book was written, from the perspective of a First Nation historian and from Canada, Chelsea Avowal. And there's a third book that an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States. By Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. So that's something for you to look at if you have an interest in that. But I did want to wrap up or give my final statement with a little bit of light. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has an Indian school in Arizona. It's called the Holbrook Indian School, and they have a website. Holbrook. Do you have that?
I can pull it up.
Yeah, visit that, because you get to see a different approach of how the Seventh-day Adventist Church has dealt with Indian schools. I mean, they're doing an amazing job, and they're right there in the Arizona area, right there near the indigenous lands, and they've been doing this for some years now. I think they started the school in 1946. So give their website a look, and you'll see how the church has approached the whole issue of the oppressed and the needs of the indigenous people of this country. So I want to just end on a high note.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So we want to give a shout out to our resident expert and fellow.
I'm not an expert.
Listen,
you are resident
to us. Yeah,
really. This has been truly enlightening and inspiring. It was heavy, but it was much needed. And we thank you so much for sharing openly, Chuck, and for enlightening us. And thank you to everyone in the comments for chiming in and sharing your opinions, and also your opinions and ideas as well. So when it comes to making a difference and what we can do to be involved, any suggestions, Chuck, Tasha? What can we do? Nick, Marlena, Pat, what am I supposed to do now with what I know?
Well, one thing I can suggest is just do some research, learn a little bit more about the indigenous people of this continent. And then you'll have a greater appreciation for where they are now. And I'm not saying it'll change your Thanksgivings dramatically. I don't think that will happen, but I think the premise and the idea of giving thanks will take on a different angle now. We should thank God for the indigenous people of this land, because they are his children too. And even the hell that they've gone through, he has still kept them. They're still here. Indigenous people will say that. As much as happened to us, we're still here. So it wouldn't hurt to learn a little more about the indigenous people, and you'll find a lot of parallels with the struggles of African slaves when we were drugged here.
I like this comment from Carrie. I think that's how we've gotten away with it. We don't really talk about, at the dinner table. At my dinner table, nobody mentioned the pilgrim.
Right.
We were just talking about. So that's kind of how we
pass the
separate.
Cranberries.
Yeah, exactly. Pass the cranberry, pass the stuffing. But yeah, I would add on to that. I mean, one of the reasons we did this, it is Native American Heritage Month. So when we see these different months pop up, instead of just scrolling by, take the time to say, okay, it's an awareness month for a reason. It's because we don't take the time usually to look into these things. And so that's one of the things we're committed to do. And so I would encourage us, let's learn more. And we want people to advocate for our causes, the things that impact us. We have to be willing to do the same for others who are hurting and don't have a voice.
That's right.
As Charles was saying, we don't see these things in mainstream media, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about them in our churches. That doesn't mean we can't talk about on this podcast. Doesn't mean we can't teach our children at home. Right. So
mostly teach our children, teach the children the right the right thing, because and I'll just stick this in with that whole teaching. It just reminded me, I did sit for 2 hours with a native Lenape Indian from this area, because Pine Forge sits on their territory, their original territory. The Lenape Indians this was their land before we came. And there's a rich heritage up here at Pine Forge. But in doing some research, a promo for Pine Forge Academy, I sat with a Lenape Indian, and he told me some things that just kind of blew me away. And he was the one who told me about the Wall Street story. But he said every time his daughters came home from school, and he went to the local public school, he had to deprogram them. Because they would bring home trash in their history books, and he had to say to them, "That's not true. None of this is true." And he had to instruct them. So, yeah, our children need to know the real story.
Yep.
Yeah.
We would do well to recognize that the oppression and the mythology that surrounds the oppression of these people is a part of who we are, that we participate in it. Doctrinally, included in our doctrine is the concept of what's called terra nullius, which is empty land. And that is a part of our doctrine that comes right out of Revelation chapter 13, that a nation would come up in land that was unoccupied and sparse. The two-horned, the lamb-like beast, which comes up in empty land, the United States. And this land was not empty. And the idea that it came up in empty land is not true. And we need to confess and acknowledge that we have taught, preached, believed a principle that nullifies the existence of individuals.
When's December 11th? Is when?
You gonna join them, Pat? You gonna be with them?
Yeah, I'm right behind them.
Yeah, so but what that means, though, is we have to look at that doctrine again and ask ourselves some questions.
Mercy, have mercy.
Which is funny. I had I know, which says this: whether there's a mistake or misreading in prophecy, that doesn't change the relationship that you have with Jesus Christ.
Not at all.
I had a conversation with somebody about that today, and then that's what I meant by holding on to some traditions. That when the corner gets brightened where you are, don't just hold on to it just because it's there. Because you're right about that. And a person of eschatology, when I look at that, now how do you explain indigenous people? That's where it is.
They're God's people. So this is the last day to safely eat your Thanksgiving leftovers, unless you're putting them in the freezer. So some of us are going to get back to our turkey or tofurkey. So I'll turn it back over to our producer.
You said safely eat.
Safely, that's right. We've been stretching it long enough. It's been a few days now. But yes, as has already been said, it's so wonderful for us to be able to have this discussion. We thank all of you in the chat for weighing in and sharing your thoughts. We appreciate hearing from you, knowing what's going on your mind regarding these topics. And that's what we're here for. We're here to kind of grow with you. We present things that we want to, better ourselves with. And so we appreciate you going on that journey with us. And so it's been great. We hope that you enjoyed your Thanksgiving, but now have a new appreciation for those who are mourning during the time that we're celebrating. And so
the empty
thank
seats.
you all so much. Yep. And thank you, as Chuck, as GP already said, for being willing to share with us.
Two of my favorite people, Tony and Erica.
Yeah. I'm trying to, I like to see people's names pop up. So I'm not trying to, stroke our egos.
Somebody just wrote the Bible was tampered with. Maybe that's why God brought on Ellen G. White.
That's another podcast.
That's another podcast right there.
Deborah.
And we'll
Have
talk about it in
mercy.
10 years out.
Talk to me on December the 12th.
Listen, for those who are wondering, we're not even talking about that retirement date. That's not
Yeah, I guess we're telling the producer, cue the theme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
All right, guys. Once again, we always like to put up our email in case people want to email us about something. Maybe there's more that you wanted to share that you didn't get to put in the chat. Email us at upset@ecsda.com. And don't forget to follow us on all of our podcast platforms and share with someone you know who may be interested in some of the topics that we're talking about. And that's all for today. Once again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.